Matthew Henry's Commentary on the Whole Bible. An exposition, with practical observations, of the Book of Psalms. Psalm 119:3. Gimel. Psalm 119 verse 17. We are here taught 1. That we owe our lives to God's mercy. David prays, "Deal bountifully with me, that I may live." It was God's bounty that gave us life, that gave us this life, and the same bounty that gave it continues it, and gives all the supports and comforts of it. If these be withheld, we die, or, which is equivalent, our lives are embittered and we become weary of them. If God deals in strict justice with us, we die, we perish, we all perish. If these forfeited lives be preserved and prolonged, it is because God deals bountifully with us, according to His mercy, not according to our deserts. The continuance of the most useful life is owing to God's bounty, and on that we must have a continual dependence. 2. That therefore we ought to spend our lives in God's service. Life is therefore a choice mercy, because it is an opportunity of obeying God in this world, where there are so few that do glorify Him, and this David had in his eye, not that I may live and grow rich, live and be merry, but that I may live and keep thy word, may observe it myself and transmit it to those that shall come after, which the longer I live the better I shall do. Psalm 119 verse 18. Observe here 1. That there are wondrous things in God's law, which we are all concerned, and should covet, to behold, not only strange things, which are very surprising and unexpected, but excellent things, which are to be highly esteemed and valued, and things which were long hidden from the wise and prudent, but are now revealed unto babes. If there were wonders in the law, much more in the gospel, where Christ is all in all, whose name is wonderful. Well may we, who are so nearly interested, desire to behold these wondrous things, when the angels themselves reach to look into them. 1 Peter 1 verse 12. 2. Those that would see the wondrous things of God's law and gospel must beg of Him to open their eyes, and to give them an understanding. We are by nature blind to the things of God, till His grace cause the scales to fall from our eyes, and even those in whose hearts God has said, "Let there be light," have yet need to be further enlightened, and must still pray to God to open their eyes yet more and more, that those who at first saw men as trees walking may come to see all things clearly, and the more God opens our eyes the more wonders we see in the Word of God, which we saw not before. Psalm 119 verse 19. Here we have 1. The acknowledgement which David makes of his own condition, "I am a stranger in the earth." We all are so, and all good people confess themselves to be so, for heaven is their home, and the world is but therein, the land of their pilgrimage. David was a man that knew as much of the world, and was as well known in it, as most men. God built him a house, established his throne, strangers submitted to him, and people that he had not known served him. He had a name like the names of the great men, and yet he calls himself a stranger. We are all strangers on earth, and must so account ourselves. 2. The request he makes to God thereupon, "Hide not thy commandments from me." He means more, "Lord, show thy commandments to me. Let me never know the want of the word of God, but, as long as I live, give me to be growing in my acquaintance with it. I am a stranger, and therefore stand in need of a guide, a guard, a companion, a comforter. Let me have thy commandments always in view, for they will be all this to me, all that a poor stranger can desire. I am a stranger here, and must be gone shortly. By thy commandments let me be prepared for my removal hence." Psalm 119 verse 20. David had prayed that God would open his eyes, verse 18, and open the law, verse 19. Now here he pleads the earnestness of his desire for knowledge and grace, for it is the fervent prayer that avails much. 1. His desire was importunate, "My soul breaketh for the longing it hath to thy judgments," or, as some read it, it is taken up, and wholly employed, in longing for thy judgments. The whole stream of its desires runs in this channel. I shall think myself quite broken and undone if I want the word of God, the direction, converse, and comfort of it. 2. It was constant at all times. It was not now and then, in a good humor, that he was so fond of the word of God, but it is the habitual temper of every sanctified soul to hunger after the word of God as its necessary food, which there is no living without. Psalm 119 verse 21. Here is 1. The wretched character of wicked people. The temper of their minds is bad. They are proud, they magnify themselves above others. And yet that is not all. They magnify themselves against God, and set up their wills in competition with and opposition to the will of God, as if their hearts, and tongues, and all, were their own. There is something of pride at the bottom of every willful sin, and the tenor of their lives is no better. They do err from thy commandments, as Israel, that did always err in their hearts. They err in judgment, and embrace principles contrary to thy commandments, and then no wonder that they err in practice, and willfully turn aside out of the good way. This is the effect of their pride, for they say, What is the Almighty, that we should serve him? As Pharaoh, who is the Lord? 2. The wretched case of such. They are certainly cursed, for God resists the proud, and those that throw off the commands of the law lay themselves under its curse. Galatians 3 verse 10, and he that now beholds them afar off will shortly say to them, Go, you cursed. The proud sinners bless themselves, God curses them, and, though the most direful effects of this curse are reserved for the other world, yet they are often severely rebuked in this world. Providence crosses them, vexes them, and, wherein they dealt proudly, God shows himself above them, and these rebukes are earnests of worse. David took notice of the rebukes proud men were under, and it made him cleave the more closely to the word of God and pray the more earnestly that he might not err from God's commandments. Thus saints get good by God's judgments on sinners. Psalm 119 verse 22. Here. 1. David prays against the reproach and contempt of men, that they might be removed, or, as the word is, rolled, from off him. This intimates that they lay upon him, and that neither his greatness nor his goodness could secure him from being libeled and lampooned. Some despised him and endeavored to make him mean, others reproached him and endeavored to make him odious. It has often been the lot of those that do well to be ill spoken of. It intimates that they lay heavily upon him. Hard and foul words indeed break no bones, and yet they are very grievous to a tender and ingenuous spirit. Therefore David prays, Lord, remove them from me, that I may not be thereby either driven from my duty or discouraged in it. God has all men's hearts and tongues in his hand, and can silence lying lips, and raise up a good name that is trodden in the dust. To him we may appeal as the asserter of right and avenger of wrong, and may depend on his promise that he will clear up our righteousness as the light. Psalm 37 verse 6. Reproach and contempt may humble us and do us good, and then it shall be removed. 2. He pleads his constant adherence to the word and way of God, for I have kept thy testimonies. He not only pleads his innocency, that he was unjustly censured, but 1. That he was jeered for well-doing. He was despised and abused for his strictness and zeal in religion, so that it was for God's name's sake that he suffered reproach, and therefore he could with the more assurance beg of God to appear for him. The reproach of God's people, if it be not removed now, will be turned into the greater honor shortly. 2. That he was not jeered out of well-doing. Lord, remove it from me, for I have kept thy testimonies notwithstanding. If in a day of trial we still retain our integrity, we may be sure it will end well. Psalm 119 verse 23. See here. 1. How David was abused even by great men, who should have known better his character and his case, and have been more generous. Princes did sit in council, sit in judgment, and speak against me. What even princes say is not always right, but it is sad when judgment is thus turned to wormwood, when those that should be the protectors of the innocent are their betrayers. Herein David was a type of Christ, for they were the princes of this world that vilified and crucified the Lord of glory. 1 Corinthians 2 verse 8. 2. What method he took to make himself easy under these abuses. He meditated in God's statutes, went on in his duty, and did not regard them. As a deaf man, he heard not. When they spoke against him, he found that in the word of God which spoke for him, and spoke comfort to him, and then none of these things moved him. Those that have pleasure in communion with God may easily despise the censures of men, even of princes. Psalm 119 verse 24. Here David explains his meditating in God's statutes, verse 23, which was of such use to him when princes sat and spoke against him. 1. Did the affliction make his sad? The word of God comforted him, and was his delight, more his delight than any of the pleasures either of court or camp, of city or country. Sometimes it proves that the comforts of the word of God are most pleasant to a gracious soul when other comforts are embittered. 2. Did it perplex him? Was he at a loss what to do when the princes spoke against him? God's statutes were his counselors, and they counseled him to bear it patiently and commit his cause to God. God's testimonies will be the best counselors both to princes and private persons. They are the men of my counsel, so the word is. There will be found more safety and satisfaction in consulting them than in the multitude of other counselors. Observe here, those that would have God's testimonies to be their delight must take them for their counselors and be advised by them, and let those that take them for their counselors in close walking take them for their delight in comfortable walking.